Welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, where we learn about the ocean, swap sea stories, and explore our connection to the big blue. I'm your host, Kara Muzia. Let's dive into today's episode. Hey, has the ocean caught you in her net of wonder? Are you looking to be more involved without an expensive degree or career change? I've got you covered. Download my free guide, Be a Marine Biologist Without the Degree, and discover practical and fun ways to dive into science, make connections, and create your ocean journey starting today. Click the link in the show notes or visit my website, Kara Grace Muzia, that's KaraGraceMuzia.com, to get your copy today. Again, link in the show notes or visit my website, and let's dive in. Hello, mermaids, pirates, ocean lovers, and land lovers. Welcome to today's show. Today's joke is from a listener. What is Shark's favorite pasta? Lauren Ziti. Thank you to Nicholas Radka for that one. Taylor Cunningham is a trained marine biologist and shark diver. Growing up 10 minutes from SeaWorld shaped what she wanted to do in life, and that was to train Shamu. In this episode, we dive into the controversy around aquariums and animals in captivity, the importance of keeping an open mind, how to actually make money as an underwater photographer, what it's like to go on a shark dive, and so much more. Taylor also shares tips on what to look for if you're thinking about going on a shark diving tour, so stay tuned for that. I also want to give you a heads up that we're going to take a summer break from recording new episodes. We'll be back at the end of the summer with fresh new episodes for you. Until then, I invite you to re-listen to some of your favorites. We've got topics covering sharks, nudibranchs, photographers, chemists, corals, and so much more. Without further ado, here's Taylor. Please enjoy. Taylor, welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on, Kara.
Yeah, so you knew you wanted to be a marine scientist from a young age. What was it? Do you have like a specific memory that sparked that interest in the ocean that made that connection for you?
Honestly, no. Not in that there was a specific moment in time or instance that I was like, that's when I love the ocean. I was really lucky growing up in Florida to be around the water a lot in general. My parents put both me and my younger siblings in learn to swim classes at a really young age. Drowning is the number one cause of childhood death in the state of Florida. And so, just for safety purposes, they wanted us to be able to be comfortable in and around the water. And so, I could float and make it to the side of a pool before I could even walk, kind of thing. So, the water was always a very comfortable place for me growing up. And although I grew up in Orlando, so not necessarily coastal Florida, coast wasn't far away. And I had parents that loved being in and around the water and near the ocean. And they had actually gone on their honeymoon out to Hawaii when they first got married and fell in love with it. And so it was sort of their ultimate goal to retire somewhere out here in the islands. And so every year, the family would save up all their money to hopefully be able to go on a short trip over to Hawaii each summer. And so I was really lucky to be able to grow up spending a lot of time in the ocean and even getting to experience places like Hawaii that had beautiful reefs and pristine ecosystems and lots of wildlife from a super young age. Um, as much as I don't necessarily agree with it at this point in my career, I grew up like 10 to 15 minutes from SeaWorld. And so being a Shamu trainer as a kid was like peak dream of mine. Obviously, that has since changed and developed into new dreams and new ideas as time has gone on and as I've just learned more about uh, wildlife and conservation and that sort of thing. But as much as it would be really nice to pinpoint a specific moment where I was like, yeah, that's for sure when I love the ocean, I was really lucky, I guess, to have many of those moments spread across my childhood specifically. So, um, it kind of I always joke that I feel way more comfortable in the water than I do on land. And so it always sort of was uh a special connection in a special place and something that I knew I was passionate about from a really young age.
Makes sense. Just prolonged exposure and you just totally fell in love. I understand that.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to the SeaWorld thing in a minute because it is
Hmm.
something I want to talk about. It is there's definitely two sides to that. So we're going to
Of
come back
course,
to that
yeah.
in a minute. I'm really curious your journey. What was the point that you were like, all right, I love the ocean. I want to study it. I want to become a marine biologist. What did that look like for you? And where did you go with it?
I think again, like from a young age, I knew I was really interested in the ocean.
Hmm.
I grew up a competitive swimmer, and so I kind of was very focused athletically on that and thought a lot of my career was going to go that way. And then ended up kind of injuring both of my shoulders in high school, and that sort of pivoted into kind of accidentally finding free diving just because I was training apnea without necessarily knowing that that was what I was doing. Um, but I think if you would have asked me as a really little kid, I would have said, yeah, I want to be a Shamu trainer. And then I kind of grew up a little bit and sort of started to realize some things about captivity and also just about what I actually wanted. Um, there was a short stint where I was like, screw the ocean, I'm going to be on Broadway. Like, very happy that didn't work out. I wish I would have had some people around me to be like, let's maybe rethink that one. And eventually did circle back to the ocean. Going into university, I had moved past sort of the idea of like animal trainer at that point, but I was still wanting to work, especially growing up in Florida and having facilities um, all around the state that work in like turtle and dolphin rehab. I thought that was kind of the path that I was going to take, at least when I first entered school. And then once I got there, I was talking to fellow classmates and other students, and it sounded like pretty much everybody wanted to do that. And I sort of decided, I was like, it doesn't really seem like turtles or dolphins need my help. They've got plenty of people that are interested and wanting to help save them. And I had a professor at the time who I eventually ended up working under and doing research with um, that studied sharks. And that had really piqued my interest. And I was like, oh, well, people really don't like sharks. And luckily, it does seem like with social media and just Shark Week and, general point of view, there are more shark lovers out there than I think however many years ago, a decade ago or more. Um, but at the time, and although of course there were still some, it did feel more overwhelmingly like a daunting task to try and teach people or get people to want to care about them. And so I kind of shifted my focus, at least species wise, more in that direction, um, and was involved in research throughout my university career and a little bit after. And that's what sort of eventually led me out here to Hawaii from Florida. I had gotten involved with a dive operation that um, was looking for some research assistance. And so I kind of got involved that way. And after being stuck doing more lab-based research for so long, it was kind of nice to shift and do more field-based work or more in-water work. Um, and that's what sort of led me into guiding and then kind of down the line into the photography work that I more so focus on now. Yeah, I don't think I necessarily knew as a kid that this is where I would end up, but I definitely, there was that through line, of knowing that I was passionate about the ocean, knowing it was something I wanted to work in. But I don't think I would have been able to imagine necessarily what I'm currently doing as sort of the end result.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like probably not everybody, but every other person I talk to is like, oh, I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Yeah. I
So it's
think
really fun.
too, I have a lot of students and things that do talk to me and want advice or um, say that they're interested in marine science. And um, I always kind of tell them, I'm like, well, most of us aren't doing this job because it's like super lucrative or this incredible like financial career, like it really is a career of passion. Not to say that you can't create a living out of it. I've been very lucky to do so, and I know plenty of other scientists and conservationists that have been able to do so, but it's not as much of a straightforward path, I think, as let's say if you went into law or medical or finance or whatever it may be, or business. And I think too, I've tried really hard in my career. Obviously, there were certain species or certain projects and conservation concepts that I was more passionate about than others and wanted to focus on more. Um, but I have, I think, over my career tried to keep an open mind to opportunities or to other things also being interests of mine, or allowing other things to also be interests of mine, and not to like pigeonhole in that I'm only going to work on this one specific thing. Um, and so that's another kind of, I guess, piece of advice I normally give to students, either that are about to enter into a degree or that are currently in a degree and thinking about work or what they want to do with their degree, is that you shouldn't be closed off to other parts of the marine world that maybe you wouldn't have initially considered interesting or initially considered something you're passionate about. I think the greatest example for me was I took a marine invertebrate class when I was in university, and my professor studied photosynthetic sea slugs, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I ended up TAing for him and also just like doing a bunch of research with him, and it was super cool. And never in a million years would I ever have entered university and been like, I'm going to study slugs, you know? And so I think being open to letting other things pique your interest or allowing yourself to be passionate about multiple things is really useful, and something that I definitely have tried to do throughout my career. And I think honestly is kind of what's led me now to sort of being like a woman of many hats in that I wouldn't necessarily say that I have like one job. I kind of do a lot of random things, all within that scope of marine science, but in a lot of different aspects.
I really like that advice though of give following your curiosity and being
Mhm.
open to that. Because yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
I hear most common is the dolphins. Is
Yeah.
people want to work with the dolphins, and
Oh,
if
they're
they can't,
charismatic.
right, charismatic megafauna. I get it. I get it.
Hmm.
They're lovely. They're very entertaining,
Yeah.
and that's what drops people in. So I really like the idea of yeah, opening that fascination. And seeing what else is out there. I had a similar experience in undergrad. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I was just interested in all of it.
Hmm.
Corals, probably more than anything. But then I learned about the algae, and I like totally
Yeah.
nerded out on like a marine plants class. And I was like, this is
Oh,
great. I love
if you
this.
don't have a favorite algae, like Caulerpa is the mine. You know,
I
like you
love
have
it.
to have a favorite marine algae. I have like a set of mugs that have like Caulerpa and a couple of other ones like on each of the mugs, and they're like pictures of micro microscopic like slide decks that I'm
Oh,
obsessed
that's
with.
super cool. I love that. One of the things you brought up was freediving. So
Hmm.
I love it. It's like Zen.
Hmm.
You mentioned apnea, and I want to clarify really quickly. It's just breath holding for anybody that is not in
Yes.
the marine science slash mostly freediving world.
Hmm.
Um, it sounds like it was a really smooth transition, more or less, from like swimming into freediving and then just translating that into the ocean world. Where did you kind of start marrying that like recreation, fun swimming, freediving time into like
Hmm.
bringing that into what you do?
Yeah, I think like I said, I kind of fell into free diving without necessarily even knowing it because of sort of my competitive swimming background. I was always really comfortable in the water. At a young age, my dad had taught me how to equalize, so how to like adjust the pressure in my ears if I wanted to go look at something deeper on the reef. And so I felt pretty comfortable in the water. I think as far as it, I guess, becoming a little bit of my career. Now, granted, I'm not a free dive instructor, so um, I don't necessarily teach others. I can give general pointers and advice, but I'm not a certified freediving instructor. But most of the work that I do, specifically the guiding that I do, is primarily freediving based. Um, I have my dive masters, so I am certified to lead scuba dives as well. Freediving will always be my first love and definitely what I prefer. But I think honestly, it wasn't really until I kind of started working out here in Hawaii and getting involved with some dive organizations out here that I kind of had the realization I had already been freediving, pro- granted, very ineffectively and like not the correct way, but I had sort of been freediving or amateur freediving without even necessarily knowing it. And I was fully YouTube certified for a long time. You know, once I first realized that freediving was a thing that you can really get good at, I was definitely an internet student. It actually took many years until I did a proper course. And for anyone interested in freediving, I highly recommend taking a proper course because even for me, I went in having already hit depths of 60 plus feet and things like that. Um, and I still learned a ton. And as far as all the safety stuff, absolutely, you should take it no matter what level of diver you are, even if you're diving over 100 feet, etc. Like it's very, very useful information. But for a long time, I very much was learning as you go kind of thing. Post getting my dive master, I started working as a guide, specifically for shark diving tours out here in Hawaii. Those are all free dive based tours, and so that one just gave me a ton of time in the water and a ton of diving to improve upon skills and things like that. But it also sort of turned it into this odd profession in a way where, okay, yeah, I would not classify myself as like a professional freediver necessarily, but for a lot of the profession that I do engage in, whether it be guiding or photography, freediving is sort of the avenue to make those things happen. And so really it was kind of once I started getting involved in the shark diving and the guiding in that sense, that was kind of when I eventually, I guess, turned this sort of odd talent of like being comfortable in the ocean just from childhood into something that could actually help me, I guess, from a career standpoint.
Yeah, makes sense. I would just want to take a second and second what you said about taking the
Yeah.
freediving class. Again, I grew up in Florida as well, very
Mhm.
comfortable in the water. Thought I knew a decent amount and took a class, and I was like, everybody needs to take this.
Yeah.
You learn so much. It's great.
Yeah.
So, what prompted you to pick up a camera?
I really liked taking photos and stuff as a kid. My mom was very much like a vacation hobbyist kind of photographer. She loved shooting both like her children and her family on vacation, but also just scenery and animals and all that kind of stuff. And so she was always very supportive of giving us as kids like disposable cameras, or when I got like my first GoPro, that was a huge thing. And I was so excited to be able to like take pictures of the sea turtles with my GoPro. And looking back, those images are definitely really bad. But at the time, I thought it was super cool and kind of unique in that I mean, when the first GoPro came out, even then, it was still rarely very used underwater. So I kind of always loved it. From a professional sense, I don't think I really decided to invest in a proper gear setup or the time to learn how to edit or really like operate a DSLR camera in manual settings or anything like that until I had been guiding for a while and wanted to document what I was seeing and share it with people. Um, I kind of fell into the social media side of things. I never was necessarily intending on becoming any sort of like influencer or having people care that much about like what I shared online. And honestly, even now that I wouldn't necessarily classify myself as that. Um, but I was really interested, especially once I moved out to Hawaii. I wanted to share the things that I was seeing, and having that sort of scientific and more research background, I saw the internet as a very easy and digestible way for people to learn about the ocean, to care about the ocean, and to sort of use imagery as a way to connect science back to conservation in a more digestible format. Um, just because as scientists, we can read published papers and journals, and all of that's incredible, but there's a lot of scientific jargon that most people don't know what they means. And even as a marine scientist, I still sometimes don't even know what they mean. Um, and so it was really cool to be able to read those papers and then kind of combine that with an image I had taken to sort of share more about the ocean or pique people's interest in the ocean. And I think ultimately, like, the core of what I want to do or what I try to do is just to get people to fall in love with the ocean so that they hopefully care about it more. Um, and if I'm able to connect some science and conservation to it, that's absolutely incredible. But even at the very basic level, even if it's as simple as like, oh, hey, look at this cool picture of whales, if that can just maybe get one toe in the door for someone to be a little bit more excited about the ocean, then I would count that as a win. Um, but I think I initially kind of picked up the camera with hopes of sharing that and hopes of creating that sort of um, accessibility to the ocean, especially for people that aren't as lucky as us to have grown up in somewhere like Florida where there is easy access to the ocean. I think because I grew up there and then lived here in Hawaii, sometimes I forget that there are people in this country and even around the world that will never see the ocean in their life. And so documentaries and images and things like that are kind of the only way they do get the chance to experience it. And I mean, selfishly, I also just wanted to have memories of what I was seeing. You know, I had the memory of a goldfish, I joke sometimes, and that like I I would love in 20, 30 years to be able to look back on images from this year or the last decade and be able to remember those encounters or be like, wow, I can't believe I saw that. So it kind of like both selfishly and also just from a conservation standpoint was something that I was interested in and probably didn't realistically invest in a proper setup until, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Um,
How far into your journey were you at that point?
I definitely was already out here in Hawaii. I was definitely already guiding. I had probably been guiding at least a year or two
Okay.
before I like really picked up the camera. And I would always have a GoPro on dives and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think I really picked up the camera until at least 2 years in, at
Mhm.
least on a serious note. And even then, when I first picked up the camera, I didn't necessarily, the end goal wasn't to make a living or to like make photography my profession. Um, it definitely started as like, oh, cool, I want to document this and share these things. And then I was very lucky to be able to support myself in some fashion through it. But it definitely wasn't like, oh, I'm seeing these people make money this way and I can maybe do that. It was kind of just like an accident.
A happy accident. I love that. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask the question, how do you make money as a
Mm.
photographer, an underwater
Yeah.
photographer? Prints?
There's a lot of different avenues. Honestly, like I said, I would not say I have one job at
Yeah.
this point. I do a lot of random jobs. Um, what I will say, first and foremost, is that working as a photographer and even as a guide to some degree is not a stable profession. In that there is a lot of fluctuation, in that some months I was making insane money and then other months I was making no money. And so recently I have a boring, like, normal person job. I work for a remote company in like a normal 9 to 5, just as sort of like a financial buffer, I guess you could say, or something that just allows me to focus on the things that I am passionate about. That's a more recent development. And honestly, kind of the reason I took it is because I was feeling a lot of pressure to take photo jobs that I wasn't passionate about or that I didn't feel like aligned with what I care about or the values that I have, simply because it was like, well, crap, I gotta pay rent next month, you
Right.
know? And so I wanted to be able to say no to work, essentially, which is kind of why I now have this more like baseline
Mhm.
job. But as far as the photography stuff goes, it can be a variety of different things. Prints is definitely an option. Um, I do know some underwater photographers that they make their entire income on prints and they do very, very well that way. I wouldn't say for me it's a significant part of my income. I'm always open to people wanting prints. I'm always very honored if anybody wants to put an image of mine in their home. But I would say it's not like orders for that are flooding in all the time. I think the majority of honestly what I'm making as a photographer comes from a couple different avenues, because I have sort of accidentally fallen into this like social media audience.
Yeah.
There is a level of work that comes from that, whether it be me promoting a project or a product, which quite honestly is probably my least favorite form of that. And I say no probably more often than I say yes, unless it really makes sense, or whatever brand or product that I would be promoting can actually help in, I guess, like my overall mission of conservation and work, or makes my ability to do my photography work easier. So there's a portion of that. I have done a level of commercial photography. There's often where I don't necessarily promote, but I do sort of the behind the scenes campaign shoot for the products. I wouldn't say this is necessarily my favorite way that I get paid through photography, but it definitely is probably the most lucrative in the sense of most of the time brands have more budgets than nonprofits, unfortunately. But a lot of that in the past, I would reach out more, and now a lot of that just comes through organically, and that um, brands or companies know that I shoot underwater, have seen previous work that I've done, and so they know that they can get whatever desired imagery they want shooting with me. And quite honestly, I've been lucky in that I would say most, if not all, of the companies that I have shot for do kind of have an underlying goal of conservation or supporting some sort of conservation mission anyway. Because quite honestly, I think majority of them choosing to work with me versus some other actually probably more qualified commercial photographer has to do with the fact that they know that I care about whatever cause they're trying to support. So I've been very lucky that even though I don't necessarily love the commercial shooting side of things, I've been very lucky to work with companies and brands that do sort of align still with that conservation mission or supporting the ocean. So that's a chunk of it. There's another chunk of it that is shooting in conjunction with guiding. So if I'm taking people out to see the sharks or to go dive and they want to document that encounter, there's a way to sort of let people go home with some sort of like package of photos and things from their experience so that they can remember it. And in turn, also like in this day and age where it is so prevalent sharing things on social media, to then also be able to share that. And hopefully it's like, okay, cool. That's maybe going to reach 3 people who reach 5 people. And maybe those people want to care about the ocean a little bit more. So it's sort of like planting the seeds, and letting other people do the work for you in a way. And then there's other miscellaneous kind of random things, some of which is paid, some of which I do voluntarily because I just care about the mission and the project. So some of that is helping other research organizations with things like photo identification. So I spend part of the year in French Polynesia where I help submit imagery of the whales and also of sharks, to local research organizations that help with monitoring their populations and their database. I've submitted photos from some dives out here, both on Oahu and other islands, to local researchers, and they're able to kind of similarly like use those as identification markers or for education purposes and things like that. So the photography stuff, and that's honestly more what I'm passionate about. And specifically for me, it also has just given me, because I have this sort of extraneous income along with that sort of baseline income, I'm also just able to work on projects that I'm more passionate about. Whether that's something that actually then in turn makes me money, great. But a lot of times I'm just happy to share those things or work on those things out of my own passion just because I enjoy doing them. Um, so lots of various avenues. And there's been different times in my life where one or more of those have been a more significant contributor than others. But yeah, as of right now, baseline income with having that sort of normal job or that remote job has sort of actually allowed me to focus more on the projects and the things that I actually care about and am more interested in, and sort of shift the balance of where that income comes from towards something that I'm a little bit more passionate about.
I tell that to people a lot is I call it like the cover your nut job.
Yes.
I had a
Yeah.
boss that called it that and it's just stuck with me, right? So like you make sure your nut's covered, you're not in survival mode, right? And
Yeah,
then you can like go do the things that make your heart happy.
for sure.
But
And I
you have to be able to
think,
put a roof over your head.
yeah, and I think especially living here in Hawaii, which is a whole expensive and complicated conversation. I know a lot of people here specifically, whether it be divers, photographers, conservationists, that kind of have that system in place.
Mm-hmm.
But also in other ways, I know lots of friends back on the mainland too, where um, it's definitely become more normal to sort of have multiple jobs, I think, nowadays. And I think that's the other thing too, or another piece of advice that I would give people potentially looking into marine science as a career. There are for sure jobs that you can do that will fully pay your income and you will not need like a second job. And I've had those jobs in the past for sure. But at the same time, I think there are a ton of people out there that maybe they do have a career in finance or in business or in something else, but still care about the ocean and still want to help or still want to work on those other projects. And I don't think there's anything wrong or that should be discouraging about letting them be side passion projects. Like it doesn't need to fully, just because it can't consume your full life, doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. Um, and I think the financial aspect of things discourages a lot of people from pursuing marine science as a career. Um, and I don't think it should necessarily. Um, because there are ways that you can balance it and still be perfectly like okay.
I agree. I think if it's something that really speaks to you and that's a career that you want to pursue, then marine science, yes, you can absolutely make a living from it.
Yeah,
Also, not everybody needs to be a marine scientist. I
it's
think
true.
that people bring all these other, like you mentioned, finance backgrounds, accountants. I've
Hmm.
worked with HR people who just are like, oh, I always wanted to do this. Why haven't I been
Yeah.
doing this? And it's like, you don't have to quit your
Hmm.
job and like free fall into this. You can
Right.
volunteer somewhere or go on a trip and like offer your services. Like all these
Hmm.
nonprofits need all these skills that you have
For sure.
anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely something I talk about as well.
I think too, even for students like going into university or coming out of university and looking for work. And I
Mhm.
think I've written a few blogs about this that I posted on my website and stuff, but there are actually a lot of different careers in the marine sciences that aren't what people would necessarily typically assume are in the marine sciences or like I think most people are like, okay, I'm either going to be a diver, a researcher, or like an animal trainer. And that's kind of really what people equate to a marine biologist, when in reality, obviously those things definitely exist. But I would say the vast majority of jobs in marine science actually are not those. And so even for students that maybe are really nervous about the science aspect of things, just because maybe you're not like great at physics or organic chemistry, which are two that I very much struggled to barely make it through, doesn't mean that you like can't still contribute in some way. Like find how your talents and the things that you're good about can be applied to the marine sciences. Because like you were saying, there are tons of nonprofits that need like more of that admin mind. Um, and even for myself, I oftentimes end up bringing on a team of other people onto projects because I know that I'm not good at very specific things, and need other people that are passionate, that are good at those things, to come in and to help and to fill in those gaps.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point to just know where your skills are
Hmm.
and hone them and own them.
Hmm.
All
Yeah.
right, we're going controversial. So
Okay.
you grew up at SeaWorld.
I
You
did.
grew up
I
10 minutes
did.
away from SeaWorld and it really
I
helped
did.
shape your childhood.
Yep.
And then Blackfish came out. Was that like the pivotal moment or were you starting to like look
No.
at things a little more clearly before that? I shouldn't say clearly. Were you looking at
Um,
things a little differently before that?
no, I was actually still a big defender of SeaWorld post Blackfish coming out.
Okay.
I actually wrote, I think it was like a 25, 30 page paper in college about blackfish specifically. And granted, I was not, it was a very unbiased paper in that it really covered both sides and sort of actually was more focused on how media plays a role in our sort of like
Everything. Our psyche.
decision making process about what is considered good and what's considered bad. Um, and essentially sort of looked at Blackfish and what was skewed or false in the documentary, what was positive or true in the documentary, and sort of evaluated it from there on public opinion. Um, so I've done a lot of research on SeaWorld in general, on the documentary in general. But honestly, I don't think my opinion on captivity really changed until I started experiencing animals in the wild, specifically cetaceans, and
Whales and
getting the
dolphins.
opportunity, yeah, so whales and dolphins, or just even marine mammals in general,
Mhm.
um, getting to be lucky enough to have encounters with species in their natural habitat and seeing the complex array of behaviors and social structure and life that they naturally live compared to what happens in captivity, I think was sort of the real pivotal point for me to what I decided I was okay with and what I wasn't. And I would still say, quite honestly, I'm not fully 100% against a SeaWorld existing or an aquarium existing. I think that, unfortunately, I don't believe that cetaceans should be in captivity. Um, Based on their intelligence and just life, essentially. I don't think that captivity is a place that they thrive or that is healthy for them in any way. Sort of my general rule when it comes to what animals I think are maybe more suited for captivity or aren't kind of comes down, at least for me personally, to intelligence and migration. Like, how smart cognitively are these animals? Not to say that I do think we discredit a lot of fish on their level of intelligence. Um, I think maybe I'm referring to intelligence more in like an emotional intelligence factor, something that I think animals that have particularly strong social bonds, like cetaceans and marine mammals, um, have maybe more so than something like a sardine, you know, um, or highly migratory animals. So, for example, some species of sharks, which migrate long distances in the ocean. So, for me, that's sort of where I draw my like hypothetical barrier of what I think is okay or what is not okay. And of course, the AZA and other regulatory operations do have criteria, you know. So, like for a sea turtle, if they're rescued and put into an aquarium, by AZA standard or regulation, that animal has to have at least one working front and one working back flipper in order to be reintroduced into the wild. The AZA has essentially determined that without that, that animal is better suited to live in captivity and will have a better chance of survival than they would in the wild. Of course, there's an argument to be made about natural selection, and like there's lots of different views that you can take. And who's to say that the decisions that the AZA or that regulatory systems have put in place are even necessarily the right ones? But I think for me personally, I kind of draw my line at emotional intelligence and migration. And I think nowadays there's so much incredible technology out there, whether it be robotic dolphins that literally look exactly like the real thing, or VR, or projections, like there's a lot of different ways that we can still introduce people to the ocean, even in an aquarium setting, without the need to house those specific animals as well. I think, unfortunately, we're in a situation where, like, we've tried to reintroduce orca and other species back into the wild that were born in captivity, that were bred in captivity. It hasn't really gone great. um, and so we're not exactly in a situation right now where we've figured out a way to successfully do that to where they can naturally reintegrate with this complex society of orca in the wild. Um, and so they are kind of stuck essentially in this situation. And I do think if they're going to be anywhere, somewhere like a SeaWorld that has billions of dollars and tons of resources and a lot of research and education, it's a better place for them than definitely some other zoo and aquaria, both in the state of Florida and elsewhere, that don't offer nearly as nice of facilities or care for the animals. Um, but in a perfect world, I think it would be awesome one day to see places like SeaWorld or zoos or aquariums still be able to exist, but be more selective about the animals that they keep in captivity. For example, if you're going to have this big tank and you are desperately needing to put a shark in it, maybe something like a nurse shark or a zebra shark or some animal that can buccal pump that's happy to sit on the bottom that naturally has a very small home range. Maybe that's a little bit better suited than something like a sandbar shark that typically lives in hundreds of feet of water, has more migrational patterns. So it's it's not, I don't think there's unfortunately like a perfect answer as to like what the ideal aquarium would look like, because even for me, like I know there are people that would not agree with what I'm saying, that would say, oh, no, no animal should be in captivity, or all the animals are fine in captivity, who cares? Um, but yeah, I think growing up, it would be hypocritical of me to say that there's no benefit or impact that comes from places like SeaWorld or aquariums, because quite frankly, I think that was a huge reason that I cared about the ocean, or that I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in the marine sciences. Because I spent so much time there as a kid and it was super exciting. There was nothing in the world I wanted more than to be a Shamu trainer. And when Blackfish came out and they stopped letting people in the tank with the animals, I was mad. I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, okay, fine. I can't swim with the orcas, then I'll swim with the dolphins. Like I was very much, I that was what I wanted for my career. And granted, now I definitely don't want those things or agree with most of those things. And I think, or I would like to think, that most of the trainers and staff that do work at these facilities really do care about the animals and want what's best for them, even if in turn they are kind of still supporting this idea of captivity. But again, to my point, we can't, at this point, we haven't figured out a good way to free them. So shouldn't we do our best to try and give them a good life while they are stuck in captivity? Like it's a very complicated issue, and I don't think there's really a perfect answer to it. Um, but I do think there is value in having those species ambassadors, and having people's ability to see them. And it's part of why I like guiding so much and being able to facilitate safe and responsible wildlife interactions actually in the ocean for people, because at the end of the day, I don't think anything can replace an in-person experience. And as much as with my photography and my videography, I try and get as close as I can to giving people that sort of pseudo experience. There's just nothing that can compare to seeing a person who's terrified of sharks, crying, doesn't want to get in the water, 45 minutes later be begging me not to leave. Like there's just nothing that can be better than that experience for people, and like having that real life experience. And so it's been really cool being able to sort of almost give the zoo experience but without the zoo part
Yep.
in a way. And to be able to facilitate that for people, I think that's quite honestly my favorite part of what I do, is just to facilitate people's connection with the ocean in as safe and as exciting of a way possible. But yeah, I can't sit here and pretend that places like SeaWorld didn't shape me to like lean into this job in some way, shape, or form.
There's always a gray area, and I agree.
Hmm.
There is no perfect like this is it. This is the solution. There's so many sides to it. And SeaWorld does do wonderful things. They have a wonderful rehab center. I've taken sea turtles there personally, and
Yeah,
um, so they do wonderful things. There's always two sides.
yeah,
Thank you
for
for
sure.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Walk me through what is it like to go on a shark dive?
Well, it depends on where you're going shark diving, I
All right,
will say, for
if
one.
we're going with you and your favorite spot to take people, what is it
Okay.
like to go on a shark dive?
Yeah. So out here in Hawaii specifically, I work on the North Shore. This is pretty much the only place in the Hawaiian Islands where you can specifically go on a shark dive. I'm lucky in that I'll also guide more of like wildlife safari type of tours in places like Kona on the Big Island, where it's a little bit more like if we find one cool, but it's not necessarily as much of a guarantee or as much of an expectation. Whereas on the North Shore, we're very lucky. There's sort of this historical fishing grounds that has brought in a lot of shark activity. And so we can pretty regularly go to the same general area and expect to see some sort of shark. There is still the weird, like 10% of the time where nobody shows up and it's like, okay, well, it's the ocean. Um, But in general, we at least get to see one shark. Sometimes we're lucky and there's more than one or multiple species. And so our tours typically run about every 2 hours. So we can do multiple per day, which is really nice. You'd essentially like get on the boat on the way out of the harbor. We talk to you all about kind of like what to expect, what the shark's behavior is like, what we're looking for, how to safely be in the water with the sharks. And granted, ultimately the guide is there to like be your barrier, to be your sort of like, I always say sort of like your translator in that I'm reading the shark's behavior and translating that to the people, and then vice versa. I'm reading the people's behavior and kind of acting as a buffer or translator of that to the sharks. And so we kind of talk all about what to expect and what the dive is going to look like as we're heading out. Um, and then once we get out there, it's pretty much like, all right, let's see what shows up. Um, we're very lucky in that because the sharks kind of regularly visit this zone or this area, we don't have to like bait or feed them necessarily. They kind of have this association or this Pavlovian response with the sound of the boats. And so typically we can get the sharks to come into the area without the need for any sort of chum, which is a pretty cool and unique thing. In that most other parts of the world, Florida, Bahamas, Maldives, a lot of those are baited dives, which don't get me wrong, I very much enjoy. um, but it's not what we need to do, which is nice. And so we'll hop in pretty much as the guide. We get in the water first. We sort of figure out what the situation is, whether that's how many sharks, what type of sharks, what behaviors we're seeing. Um, and then we kind of enter guests into the water. And the idea is basically just to help sort of facilitate a snorkel or a free dive with these animals in the safest way possible. And so typically we've got like 45-ish to an hour in the water, and yeah, it's I mean, I think people assume that the dive is going to be really adrenaline crazy. The sharks are going to be everywhere, swimming super fast, trying to bite them, and that's just not really what's happening. If I don't know if you've spent any time with sharks anywhere in the world, but like they're typically pretty chill. Um, and so I think people oftentimes expect this like crazy adrenaline rush, and for sure people do sometimes get that simply just from the fear built up in themselves. And I normally tell people, give yourself 30 seconds. I'm like, if you can make it 30 seconds, chances are you're going to be okay the rest of this dive, because it's sort of just the initial like shock of, oh my gosh, I'm in the ocean, I can't see the bottom, there's a ton of animals, I maybe haven't really snorkeled that much before. Typically it's kind of like a short panic, and then they're like, oh, okay, it's fine. And so a lot of times by the end of the dive, people are pretty stoked and don't really want to leave. But we kind of finish out the dive, and then I personally, and a lot of the other companies on the North Shore will do this as well, but I really personally like to talk with everyone kind of about conservation as we pull back into the harbor. Um, because at the end of the day, I love giving people the experience, but I want them to also know why we give them the experience.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of just talking about why sharks are important, what threats they're facing, how those clients can then help, even if it's as simple as just like sharing a picture that they took on their dive, and giving the sharks a little bit of positive press. It doesn't have to be some like crazy, now I have to become a shark researcher kind of thing. But yeah, we're lucky if we get to do that multiple times a day. Obviously, as much as there is that conservation initiative behind it, it is still an ecotourism operation. So a lot of our ability to operate does depend on if people are booking, what the weather is looking like, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I've been very lucky to have that be such a big part of what I've done over the last many years. And selfishly, I love doing it because I do love changing people's mind, but it also just gives me more hours in the water to hang out with the sharks and to dive. And as much as sharks are what we're aiming for, you never know what's going to swim by. Like we are 3-4 miles offshore, so it's I've seen whales, I've seen dolphins, I've seen all sorts of other cool, crazy things. So the more time in the water, the better, personally for me. But it's also really cool to be able to sort of facilitate that experience for people.
I'm really curious your thoughts on the chumming. It seems like, or the bait diving. For
Hmm.
me, my view I've kind of flip flopped. I agree. Like, it's really wonderful to be able to give people the experience of showing them, like, look, sharks are not
Yeah,
just going to come up and bite you.
yeah.
They're curious, they're slow moving, like, they're not going to come
They're
up
just
and
doing
just
their
attack you.
thing.
Right.
Yeah,
But you don't feed wild animals for a reason. You don't want them associating people with food. So
right.
I've been, I've walked the line with the baited dives. What are your
Hmm.
thoughts on it?
Personally, I'm kind of all for it, which I
Okay.
know is not really everybody's point of view. I think there's a time and a place in the sense that it should be done in a safe way. Like there are definitely certain methods of baiting for sharks or feeding sharks that I think behaviorally are more suited or create a safer diving environment than others. Um,
Could
that
you
being
give
said, that
examples? Because I'm going to have people that are going to want to go on shark dives and they're like,
yeah,
what's a good operation to go with?
I think unfortunately there's not an overarching like global answer. I think a lot of it does depend on where you are and what sharks you're seeing and what's kind of already been put in place.
Okay.
Um, I do think as a general rule of thumb, it can actually be more dangerous if, let's say, we're scenting for sharks. So maybe there's a crate in the water, or um, they've done some sort of like blood drip or something to try and entice the sharks to come into the area, but then the animals are never fed. I think that can create some frustration. And I've just seen some behavioral things in the animals. It's almost like, imagine if you were starving and then somebody like was waving a Snicker bars in front of your
Sure.
face and then like not letting you have it, kind of
Sure.
thing. So I do think if you are going to do a baited dive, it doesn't need to be a lot of feeding, but there should be some sort of reward payout to the animals, simply because it can create this sort of like behavioral frustration, or specifically in sharks where you're dealing with multiple animals in the same area, can create a lot of competition. And there will inherently be a more competitive environment between the sharks when baiting, no matter what. But I think if they're getting that constant like stimulus that there is a predatory opportunity, but they're not seeing the payout of it, it sort of builds this like weird tension in the water that can sometimes be harder to control as a diver or as a safety diver than if there is some sort of like payout, even if it's very minimal. So that's kind of the only global, at least that I've seen and what the diving that I've done, that I think is kind of like an overarching maybe kind of rule to follow. Um, in, let's say, places like Florida, I know there's maybe more like crate diving where there's sort of like a crate of bait that gets strung behind the boat and then animals are slowly hand fed from that crate. Places like the Bahamas, it's instead of being at the surface, that crate is set on the bottom because they're scuba diving and they have that sort of system. Um, and then like places like the Maldives, for example, uh, they basically just take a big old like tuna head and shove it under a rock and then like kind of like back away, you know? So there's lots of different methods that can be used. Um, an argument to some being better than others is kind of tough. Um, I do think if an inherently the animals are going to be habituated in some sense. What I will say is a lot of researchers have done studies on areas like Tiger Beach, where they do still see a lot of those animals migrate away, or the animals that always did migrate away still will migrate away, will still contribute to their natural hunting patterns, even outside of this like baiting activity. But I think to some degree, it's also undeniable to not admit to some level that those animals are being habituated to that behavior. Um, I think for me personally, if there's enough evidence that beta dives are happening and the overall migration and like function of those animals in the ecosystem is not being changed, that's where I'm kind of like, I don't know. We kill a lot of sharks. Sometimes I feel like they deserve a little something in return. I don't know. Um, but if there's significant evidence where it's like, okay, we're seeing these sharks fed in this area and it's preventing a normal migration pattern from happening or something like that, then I start to have a little bit more of an issue with it. Um, as far as like responsible operators go, I don't think that a dive operation is simply irresponsible because they bait, at least from a shark diving perspective. I totally agree with like, I don't know, if I'm going on a snorkel, I don't really like operators that like feed crackers and stuff to the fish. You know, like for me, and I'm sure people can argue what's the difference, you know,
Yeah.
but um for me personally, if we're speaking specifically about shark diving, I don't think baiting itself, um, at least in my personal decision, is the worst thing in the world. Um, I think if you're looking as far as who's a responsible operator and who's not, I think it comes down to how many years of experience does this operation have in this location? How many years of experience do their guides have? Because an operation can exist for 10 years, but if they're rotating guides every year, every other year, realistically, their like cumulative experience is not that great. Um, do they have rules or like regulations that they've explicitly told you about ahead of time? Um, I think it's a good sign for an operator to have some guidelines. And I've met plenty of divers who are like, oh, I didn't want to go with those guys because they were like really strict. They like wouldn't let me do all these things that I wanted to do. I was like, that's probably because they're good at what they do, you know, like they're trying to keep you safe or they have the experience where they've seen things and learned from them and said, let's not do that again in the future. Um, I do think there's a thing of overfeeding. I think that's definitely something that can happen. Um, where to draw that line is difficult, obviously, depending on species, depending on location. Um, but I think it is kind of one of those things for me, if I'm on a baited dive, I try not to feed more than what's necessary to keep the animal's interest. And I've definitely, I do think it's harder to feed sharks than people realize. I think most people think if they drop like one little piece of fish in the water, that all of a sudden all the sharks are going to be like right on it. I have fully waved whole fish in front of the face of sharks and then look at me and go, and swim the other way. Like it's not actually like so easy all the time. And the animals, they're still like, they do, as much as baiting the water does obviously entice them and undeniably can change their behavior to some degree. I've totally seen sharks come in, have two snacks, and then be like, all right, peace. That was nice. I'm leaving. And then not return for the rest of the dive. Or vice versa. I've seen sharks that weren't interested and then towards the end decided, okay, maybe I'll try this out and see how it goes. I don't think there's a perfect answer. And I definitely understand, although personally I'm more on the like for baiting side of the argument. I do understand people's hesitations towards it, the kind of like, not to say controversy, but the opinions against it. So I think ultimately, if you like sharks, you just kind of have to decide for yourself if this is something you're okay with or not. And everybody's going to draw that line in a little bit of a different place for sure.
One of my chief concerns with it was the human interaction piece, right?
Hmm.
Like, again, we live in Florida. You don't feed
Yep.
alligators because then they
Yep.
start to associate people with
Hmm.
food, right? And we already are overcoming the Jaws stigma,
Right.
finally.
Yeah.
So that was my concern. So you haven't
Hmm.
noticed like an uptick in interest in humans at all? I mean, like you're saying
Personally,
they leave and they go on their
no.
regular migratory routes.
Yeah. Personally, no.
Okay.
I do think as a spearfisher
Yeah.
man,
Woman.
woman, spearfisher woman, like
Water woman.
water woman, um, it is clear that in areas with a high shark population that also experience a lot of spearfishing, that sharks have gotten smart and have realized they can take advantage of that catch. And in some places around the world have even gotten to the point where like, oh, cool, if I just like bump that person, they're going to get scared, let go of the fish, and then I can have it. Um, Not everywhere in the world, but like there is an undeniable association that's happening there. As far as places that do baited dives and also see people, let's say, like going to the beach nearby or
Mm.
diving or surfing or whatever it is, there's very little data, and the data that does exist doesn't seem to support the idea that bites have increased at all with the presence of dive operations. It's hard, or it sort of seems like the a number of bites that existed pre those baiting dive operations is basically exactly the same. There hasn't necessarily been an uptick in that. From my own experience diving with sharks and doing baited dives with sharks, it almost seems more of like a temporary peak of interest in
Yeah.
that certain individuals that I've dove with over long periods of time on a specific dive can definitely associate like, okay, this person, they're very smart, like they'll be able to target, if I'm the one that's feeding them by hand, they know that it's me and they know to come back to me versus somebody else. um but it doesn't seem like then, if let's say we saw that animal the next day or a week later and there wasn't still that same food stimulus in the water, it doesn't, at least to me, appear like that animal is still super targeted. Um, I think there's an argument that can be made for both. Because clearly, like for Spiros, like it's clear that the sharks have sort of learned that there's this predation option for them. Um, I'm not sure, because quite often, if you are spearing, typically you can get a fish or two before the sharks really start to become annoying or a problem, or a pest in a way. Uh, it's more so than after that. So again, I'm not sure like how long this habituation or this like learning lasts. I'm sure it does to some degree continue, but I'm not sure if like, let's say I go out to a spot and I spear a fish one day, and my first fish, there's no sharks. I spear it, sharks show up. Second fish, sharks realize they can get the fish. Third fish, I don't even land it. Um, and then the next day I go out, typically, at least what I would see is that you still have the same thing. The first fish, no sharks. Then they hear that shot or they feel whatever exciting action is happening, and then they're like, oh, okay, cool. So personally, I haven't seen like a huge uptick, and at least data from shark diving doesn't seem to suggest that it happens. But at the same time, I think it's reasonable to maybe think that it's a possibility.
You've dove with cetaceans, whales, great big whales. For
Hmm.
people that can see the video,
Yep.
can't see the video. There's a giant humpback whale that she took the picture
Yes.
of right behind her. It's amazing. And you've had lots of interactions with sharks. I
Hmm.
have a newfound obsession with cetacean eyes. I like love
Yes.
seeing their eyes like up close,
Hmm.
zoomed in. And then somebody sent me a shark eye because I like really like the
Also
cetacean
beautiful.
eyes. Yes, but very different vibe. So I'm really
Very different.
curious. What is it like interacting with one versus the other? Like, I mean, obviously they're totally different animals,
Yeah.
but
Well, first, if you like cetacean eyes, and you probably have seen this picture at this point, my really good friend Rachel Moore took this like insane image of a humpback whale eye. So I'll have to send it to you at the end of this. It's like beyond incredible. I'm sure you've actually seen it before because it kind of went viral all over the place. And if you're already
okay.
a cetacean eyeball lover, then it's probably already headed your way. But
It's like such a
um,
weird thing, but they are totally captivating.
yeah, they're the window to the soul, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Um, but yeah, so for me, when it comes to sharks and cetaceans or like whales, dolphins, we're kind of going to clump into that cetacean group. Um, it's very different. I think I will always love the sharks the most. They have definitely like a piece of my heart. Um, but there is something very, very special about when a dolphin or a whale chooses to interact with you. I would say both sharks and cetaceans are very, very smart in different ways. I always kind of compare it. Sharks have a very instinctual intelligence. Their whole life is about survival and reproduction. So they're very smart. They can read body language incredibly well. They have a ton of crazy sensory systems to make them these apex predators. In some ways, it almost seems like they're like psychic in that they can read what you're going to do before you can do it, probably because of that ability to read body language. Um, and something that I greatly appreciate about them, they don't lie to you. Like they are what they are, and they're gonna do what they're gonna do. And typically, they warn you before they do crazy things. And so, I really love sharks because they are a straightforward animal. Like they will tell you how they're feeling. Maybe not in the way that most people will pick up, but if you've spent enough time with them, like they're very obvious in what they want and what they don't want. Whereas and they're just focused on survival, like their whole they just want to make as many babies as possible. And not that I think for any animal that is a driving factor of their biology, but for sharks specifically, like their whole life is just how can I conserve as much energy as possible so that I can make babies, and so that's where, hunting instinct and decision making, that's where it all stems from for them. uh for cetaceans, also very intelligent, but I think it's more of an emotional intelligence. They have those strong social bonds. They, in some species, exhibit like human-esque traits in the sense of they can be evil or nurturing or protective, like things that sharks have no parental care. Like they don't have social bonds truly. There are studies, and they're pretty cool, that have found that there could be an affinity between animals where maybe they prefer to swim more closely with one individual of a school than others. But even
Hmm.
within that school, they are more likely genetically similar, but they're not homies. It's not like a pack of wolves that works together. It's very much just, I'm hanging out with that guy because maybe he's going to smell food and I can steal it from him, kind of thing. Whereas with cetaceans, they do have these incredible social structures and strong bonds with one another and exhibit behaviors that are very mammal, esque, or more comparable to us humans. Um, like bottlenose dolphins are evil, which is like something that you really, or like orcas, even if you think about an orca that will play and kill its food the way a cat will without eating it just because they're bored. Um, and so there is something about if a shark is in the area with you and like chooses to approach you, it's more out of like curiosity or just, hey, can I eat you? Kind of, even if it's not an aggressive approach, they're just trying to figure out what you are. Um, and it's incredibly magical, I think, to interact with sharks. And I definitely would say I have a weird parasocial relationship in that I love them, but I know that they don't love me back, kind of thing. Whereas with cetaceans, there is sort of this emotional connection that can happen in that it's their choice. And not that the sharks couldn't choose to leave you alone, but typically you're feeding them and like there's other things that could lead a shark to be interested in you more than just purely being like, hey, I want to hang out with you. Whereas with cetaceans, it does feel much more intentional when they choose to approach you versus when they choose to just, decide to go the other direction. Um, and so it does feel very special, like they're, as much as the sharks will always have my heart and I will probably leave most cetaceans for a chance to see the sharks. It's pretty insane to have something like a humpback whale or a bottlenose dolphin or um, a pilot whale or like any other species of cetacean decide to say like, I like you. I think I'm going to hang out with you for a minute. Um, which can sometimes also be terrifying because they are so smart. So that, like for me, I don't really take things personally with the sharks. There's one or two individuals that I see frequently out here that I'm like, you might actually personally not like me. But in general, I don't really take things personally with the sharks. Like if one of them this one day is super competitive and like rushes me, I'm just like, sorry, I probably did something to like annoy you in that moment. Whereas with cetaceans, it can feel very pointed or very purposeful if they are communicating to you that they don't want you around, which I would say very, very rarely have I been in situations with cetaceans where they've very clearly shown me behavior wise that they're like, go away, please. And the times that have, I say, okay, noted, I will leave. um, but yeah, because they're just so socially and like emotionally intelligent, there is sort of this more emotional connection that happens when you do get the chance to interact with them in the water. Um, but like the animals I'm the most scared of for sure in the ocean are species of cetaceans. Um, because it is a little bit of like, okay, I know how capable you are. I'm not redirecting a pilot whale. That's,
No.
that's not happening.
No.
um, and so it is very much, I've had so many insane I honestly, quite frankly, have really had very few negative interactions with cetaceans. Um, but yeah, it's just like so cool for an animal to like so clearly choose to spend time with you. Um, and so I think that for me is like the biggest difference. And so I find a very different kind of joy in either situation, but honestly, like it could be literally like a fish this big that like lives on the mooring that was like hanging out. I'm like so happy to hang out with this little centimeter long fish.
Yep.
So I don't think it takes much to please me as far as like what I see in the ocean. Um, but I love them for different reasons, like the sharks will have my heart forever for sure. But there is something really cool about getting the option to interact with cetaceans.
Love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. At the end of each episode, I have a series of questions I like to ask. You ready? So what is your
Yes.
favorite field story or stories to tell? And this could be just an
Ooh,
like magical, amazing day in the field,
yeah.
or a day where like things happened and it makes a really
Hmm.
great story now.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people love to ask about like sketchy shark interactions or, like moments that felt like dangerous. And quite frankly, I've been lucky not to have too many of them. And they're honestly not my favorite stories to tell
Sure.
because I don't
There's
think
enough of
they,
those. It's okay.
yeah, there's enough of them and I don't think they really add that much. I think honestly, when people ask this question, um, there's always one interaction that I kind of return to over and over again. It wasn't even necessarily like the craziest ocean encounter I've ever had in my life. And I've been lucky to have quite a few at this point, which is truly a blessing. But I was going through a very like not great time as far as like mental health goes. I was working a lot. I was really pretty depressed and sad and just like having a hard time. And I'm honestly a very firm believer in that the ocean presents you with the interaction that you need, not necessarily the interaction that you want. And not that I didn't want this interaction, it was fantastic. But I do think there's sort of this weird kismic thing that happens for people that spend a lot of time in the ocean or that love the ocean, and that it you might have to wait a really long time to see a specific animal or to have a specific type of interaction, and it will come to you at the right time. um, or even an animal that you've seen a ton will present itself in like a different way when you most need it, kind of thing. It doesn't always have to be like this kind of story where you're like super sad and then something cool happens. It can also just be like this was the right time and that you were with the right people and the right conditions and there was a rainbow and it was amazing, like it can also be that.
Yeah.
um but I was having a really hard time and I was at work guiding and just like struggling to make it through the day, kind of thing. Like just one of those days where you have tough clients, you got tough conditions, the sharks weren't really cooperating. And we started the dive and there were no sharks. And we're like getting people in the water. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my gosh, nothing can go right today. And sometimes when there's no sharks, it can mean that there's cool wildlife. And then other times it just means that the sharks are not interested in us. But out of the blue, this huge bottlenose dolphin just comes like cruising in, stops like right in front of me, looks at me, does like this little spin, and then like swam off. And it lasted maybe 20 seconds. And I just started sobbing in my mask because it just, one, we typically actually don't get great interactions from our bottlenose here in Hawaii. They're not known for being incredibly social like they can be in other parts of the world. For sure, people have had really good interactions here, but in general, they kind of like don't really want much to do with you. Um, but I don't know. It was just something about this animal that just like randomly decided that they were going to come up to me out of everybody in the water. And like, it just felt so undeniably like a sign from the ocean that it was like, it's going to be okay. That I was a mess. And I definitely like, I would not say this was the craziest interaction. This interaction, honestly, probably wouldn't even make my top like 50 craziest animal encounters that I've ever had. But it always sticks out as the one where I'm like, yeah, like the ocean's got my back kind of thing. Where I do really think that it the ocean will present you with the thing that you need when you need it, kind of thing. And that always sticks out in my mind as the moment that most exemplifies that.
Yeah, love that. I say a lot, everything's happening for you, not to you,
Hmm.
right? And I feel like that's just, you get to send a dancing bottlenose dolphin and makes everything
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you keep the hope? There's so much to be concerned about in the ocean, for sharks definitely. Like what
Hmm.
what do you do? What are some of your practices, or how do you keep the hope?
I think for sure certain days it's easier than others.
Yeah,
Um, there's certainly a part of me that just avoids thinking about it.
sure.
Not that that's necessarily the healthiest way to deal with the negativity or the crisis of the ocean. That's what's going on. Um, but I think too, for me, it's been really important in that I very much have tried to focus what I share, what I shoot, um, what I communicate to people about the ocean. Of yes, of course, these bad things are happening, but that's like step 3 or 4 in the pipeline of fixing things. Like, really, truly, step one is just like, do you even like the ocean? And nobody, let's say, like we could pick from a million different issues, but I guess we'll use sharks as an example. Sharks are being killed off at an alarming rate. Why would someone want to sign a petition to save sharks if they hate sharks? Or not even hate sharks, but just like don't care that much about them. Like, even if it's just indifference, let alone distaste. Um, so I think for me, what's honestly been helpful is I really do try to share as much of the positive or as much of the beauty and like the magicalness that is the ocean, and trying to focus on that. And it doesn't mean that conservation is not important. It doesn't mean I still won't share petitions or talk to legislation or like think about the ocean warming to ungodly degrees and protections for marine protected areas getting stripped away. Like, it's not that those things don't weigh on me or don't matter or don't, like give a little bit of existential dread. Um, but I do really try and hold on to the fact that step one is the most important, um, at least right now. I do think it's gotten much better. I think more people care about the ocean than they used to. I think the ability to have things like Blue Planet or social media, or, there's a whole new way that people consume media nowadays, specifically about the ocean, which I think has helped a lot. But at the end of the day, there's still plenty of people out there that are just, they just don't care that much. And even if and sometimes I think it works in that I have plenty of friends. They saw one video as a kid living in Missouri of a dolphin, and they were like, oh my gosh, my whole life's mission now needs to be to save the dolphins. Like, that totally happens. But I do also think there's tons of people that will consume 100 pieces. They've seen every Blue Planet and they still just don't care that much. They're like, oh yeah, that's cool, but so some of it is a little bit of this like bombarding factor. If it's like, okay, I'm just going to keep throwing it at you and throwing it at you and throwing it at you until eventually you can't ignore it anymore, kind of thing. And so, at least for me, focusing on what makes the ocean so beautiful and the things that I like to shoot and the incredible wildlife that I have been able to encounter or have been able to share with other people really, really helps. And I do think guiding and seeing people in person change their mind, for sure, that has filled me with like hope for a million years. To like visually see that happening to people. um but I think also taking the small wins, you know. UNOC is happening this past weekend and this week, in France, and there's been lots of really cool conservation initiatives that have either been announced or initiated over this last couple of days. um and while those things take time, to put into practice, it's a little win, like, hey, that's really cool that this is happening. And even though all this other stuff is like really not good, let's take that like one little win that we can, because I think at this point we kind of have to hold on to those to continuing. Like, I think existential dread is really dangerous and can make people say, well, it's too far gone. And I would love to believe that that's not true, and maybe it is. But if we let that be the case, at least in our mindset, it will 100% be true. Whereas if we say, okay, well, I may not be able to change the world today, but I can do this one little thing that has impact, or I heard about this one positive thing that's happening on the other side of the planet, I think that helps to fuel the fire to still want to continue to do this type of work, or still want to believe in conservation. And like I said, there's definitely days where it's easier than others, but
Absolutely. I think that's the same in any role in any job. But
Mhm.
I agree. It's the little wins and holding on to them and bolstering them up so that it just helps snowball everything else. Because if all you do is focus on what's wrong, it's exhausting.
Yeah. And when in doubt, if you can, get in the ocean.
Yes, it does
like
help.
that really helps.
It does help. It does
if
help
you
a
can.
lot. And if not, a warm bath helps too.
Yes.
Substitute.
Go in the shower, close your eyes, and pretend you're swimming around.
There we go. If listeners want to find you, connect with you, learn more about you or your work, where's the best place to do so?
A couple different places. You can go straight to like social media. I'm taylork.sea, like the C, on Instagram. That's a great place. I try and check my DMs pretty regularly, so if you have questions and things, you can always reach out to me there. I do also have a website. It's taylorkcdiving or just .com. You can fill out a contact sheet on that, or there's a ton of information on there. I've written a lot of blogs over the last years, both about my experiences and also just advice and things like that. Probably some stuff that we even talked about in the podcast today. And then you can always email me. Same thing, taylorkcdiving@gmail.com. But any questions or anything like that, if you want to reach out, I am doing my best to monitor those regularly.
Perfect. I'll put a link to all of those links in the show notes as well. Yeah. Taylor, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Kara. It was great.
Have you heard about my free program, Back to Nature? Getting outside is vital to our health and the health of our planet. The cool part is, to reap the benefits, you only need a few minutes a day. This course is designed to be fun and easy to do, and perhaps spark an adventure or two. Click the link in the show notes to get started today, or visit karagracemusia.com. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to hear any insight you've gleaned. Leave a comment in the show notes or send me an email over at karagracemusia.com. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and, of course, share with your friends. If you want more resources for creating a life of purpose and meaning, plus personal insight from me that I just don't share anywhere else, join me at karagracemusia.com and sign up for email updates. Keep after your dreams and making waves in your community. One person can make a difference. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast.